friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Learning for Good. This month, we are focused on leadership assessments, and we kicked off the topic by exploring 3 types of assessments for your leaders. We looked at strengths assessments, diversity assessments, and competency assessments. And today, I want to take a deeper dive into competency assessments and look at 2 different types of those assessments. The first is the self-assessment, and the other one we'll look at is the 360 assessment. So let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. All right, so when you offer competency assessments, you have 2 different options. You can have a leader complete a self-assessment, or you can have a leader complete a 360 assessment. And I want to do a quick comparison of these 2 types of assessments. So let's start with the self-assessment. In a self-assessment, your leaders will answer a series of questions about their own perceptions of their competency strengths and gaps. So this is a quick and easy way to assess competency, but it's also subject to the leader's own bias about their skill level. Some organizations choose to offer the self-assessment anyway because they generally cost less and they're easier to administer, and you do get good information, good insight into what a leader believes to be their strengths or their areas to develop. Now, the other type of assessment is the 360 assessment. And with the 360 assessment, your leaders will still answer a series of questions about their own perceptions of their strengths and gaps. But then those responses are combined with the responses of others. That's because in addition to them doing that self-assessment, assessing themselves, your leaders will also invite others around them to answer those same questions. So generally, when they're inviting people to respond and participate in the 360 assessment process, they might include a supervisor or supervisors, they might include peers, they might include people who report directly to them, and even others in the organization as well. You can kind of work through that and figure out who are the best people to provide that insight to give you that 360-degree view. Now, this gives the leader more data, and it can reveal more insight into what their competency, strengths, and gaps actually are. But it can be intimidating to the leader to receive feedback from others. 360 assessments are generally a little bit more time-consuming than self-assessments as well. Just the time it takes to complete the self-assessment piece of it, but then to get other people to participate in the assessment process can be a little more time-consuming. And it can also be a little bit more costly to administer as well. The other thing about 360 assessments is that they require a higher level of trust within the organization. And I talk about trust a lot, but it's really important for that trust to exist because that leader has to be willing to receive that feedback that they're getting. And the people around them have to be willing to provide that feedback in a really honest and genuine way. So that's a little bit about the self-assessment as well as the 360 assessment. So your next question might be, how do I know which one is right for me? So I highly recommend using competency assessments to help leaders see which skills are their strongest and which skills might be gaps for them. So if you're trying to decide which assessment to use, which is right for you, the self-assessment or the 360 assessment, I consider a few different points. The first is cost. How much can you invest in the assessment process? The next is time. I mentioned that the 360 is more time intensive than the self-assessment. So how much time do you have to administer the assessment process? The other thing to consider is rater fatigue. So how many other surveys do you have operating, right? If you're constantly offering surveys to your staff, if you have a lot of people going through a 360 assessment process at one time, sometimes people can get fatigued by the amount of feedback that you're asking them to give. And then they tend to go maybe a little quicker through the feedback, spend a little bit less time and kind of processing and giving genuine feedback, or sometimes they might skip it altogether because they have other priorities and they've already been giving feedback in other ways. So rater fatigue is something to really consider with self-assessments versus 360 assessments. But most importantly, is that trust that I mentioned. Is that trust, does it exist in your workplace, in your environment? Will leaders be receptive to feedback? Will leaders feel comfortable giving that feedback? That piece, that trust is really, really important for a 360 assessment. And so you want to make sure that if you're trying to decide which assessment to use, if trust is a challenge for you at the moment, the self-assessment might be a better way to go, at least for the time being, while you start to build up that trust. But no matter which assessment you choose, make sure you don't stop with the assessment itself. Leaders can use the assessment results to tailor their learning and development experience. And we're going to talk more about that in our next episode. But assessments give you information, and it's what you do with that information that makes the difference. So self-assessment and 360 assessment, they're both great ways to help you and your leaders grow. They shed light on your leaders' strengths and their gaps. And if you are ready to offer an assessment to your leaders, let's chat. Head on over to my website and let's work together to develop the skills your people need so you can scale your mission and your impact even in a virtual world.